Before Moses was born, Egypt was already at war. Not with men, but with rival gods. A silent conflict waged through dynasties, bloodlines, and control of sacred technology. Rituals masked it. Law codified it. But behind the ceremonial facade, competing factions of the Elohim maneuvered for dominance over Earth's key territories. Egypt, then a jewel of advanced administration and priestly power, had likely fallen under the influence of one faction, perhaps aligned with Marduk or Ningishzidda, seeking to consolidate its hold over the Nile region. The biblical story tells of the Hebrews descending from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Tribes led by patriarchs, guided by dreams, and driven by famine to Egypt. But this migration was not random. According to the narrative, Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, rose to prominence in Pharaoh's court and became the key to preserving both Egypt and his own people from starvation. Yet this story, so often recited as providence, aligns too well with the movements of empires and the agendas of gods. The arrival of the Hebrews in Egypt occurs precisely during one of the most anomalous and charged periods in Egypt's spiritual history, the era of the Hyksos. These Hyksos, foreign rulers of Semitic origin, are remembered in Egyptian texts not merely as conquerors, but as heretics. They came from the east, from lands drenched in Mesopotamian tradition, bringing with them unfamiliar deities. Baal, El, Resheph, gods that mirror the pantheon of the Anunnaki. In linguistic traces and worship practices, their origins stretch eastward toward Akkad and Sumer. The deities they honored were not new to the earth. They were old powers, beings recorded in cuneiform centuries earlier, who had descended in fiery ships and ruled through city temples, bloodlines, and technological rites. If the Hyksos brought with them the remnants of Anunnaki allegiance, then Egypt during their rule was not merely politically divided, it was spiritually fragmented. On one side stood the native Egyptian priesthoods, loyal to the rising solar cult of Amun-Ra. On the other, an influx of foreign elites possibly aligned with rival Anunnaki factions, using Egyptian soil as a strategic extension of celestial conflict. The Hebrews, arriving during or just after this epoch, walked into an invisible war between divine houses. Enki, the engineer, scientist, and guardian of humanity, was historically known to disseminate advanced knowledge through hybrid offspring and priest kings. His son, Ningishzidda, may be deified as Thoth in Egyptian tradition, had early dominance in Nile Valley science, medicine, and temple design. The architecture of Dendera and the deeper layers of Edfu Temple echo his domain. Knowledge encoded in stone, but Ningishzidda's presence waned. Enlil's faction, more militaristic, more hierarchical, sought to cleanse unauthorized knowledge and reassert dominion through conquest and religious standardization. Enter Marduk, son of Enki, but unlike his father, hungry for central authority. He would later claim supremacy in Babylon, but some traditions hint that he sought Egyptian ground too. The Hyksos period, marked by rapid change, foreign kings, and violent displacement, may represent a covert campaign, a foothold seized by a Marduk-aligned faction. When Thebes rose and expelled the Hyksos, the reaction was not only nationalistic, it was purgative. Temples were defiled and purified. Names of gods were erased. The spiritual field was sterilized. It is immediately after this divine counterstrike that the biblical text introduces a new pharaoh, one who did not know Joseph. Historically, this could correspond to the restoration of native Egyptian rule under Ahmose I. But metaphysically, it signals a change in spiritual allegiance. The Hebrews, once protected under a shared pantheon, were now branded as remnants of an outlawed cosmic regime. Why then the enslavement? Why the decree of infanticide? Not merely fear of uprising, not economics, something deeper. The Pharaoh declares, "Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we." His words betray something unspoken, fear not of numbers, but of legacy, of blood. In the ancient world, lineage meant continuity of divine spark. Male children carried names, inheritance, the seed of priesthood. To kill them was to sever a god's ability to project influence into the mortal world. Within the Anunnaki framework, hybrids, part divine, part human, were tools of administration and dominion. The Sumerian king list makes this explicit. Kingship descended from heaven. Rule did not emerge from competence. It was granted by genetic protocol. If the Hebrews carried a line connected to Yahweh, then Egypt's genocidal policy was preemptive containment. The Hebrews were not merely enslaved, they were watched, managed, and in. Enlil was commander-in-chief of Earth's post-deluge reorganization, cold, legalistic, and ruthlessly loyal to divine hierarchy. He had long clashed with Enki over humanity's role, where Enki nurtured, Enlil restricted. Yahweh, as an echo or extension of Enlil, continues this trajectory. Isolationism, absolute command, no tolerance for rival worship. The commandment, "You shall have no other Elohim before me," is not theological. It is militaristic, a directive of exclusion. In Egypt, this placed the Hebrews under maximum scrutiny. Pharaohs ruled as divine sons of Ra. Their priests managed sacred sites, star alignments, and death protocols that reflected Anunnaki engineering. A rogue god, growing influence through a rising population, represented not only theological descent, but potential technological destabilization. If Yahweh could reclaim Egypt's Hebrews, he might rebuild a foothold in one of the most energy-saturated lands on Earth. This could not be allowed, so the yoke tightened. Surveillance became labor. Labor became bondage. Bondage turned to extermination. But the Hebrews remembered. Despite silence, the name of their Elohim endured. His history suppressed, his presence unseen. Yet his war was not over. In this cauldron of spiritual warfare, one child would survive the purge: Moses. The war would resume, not in temples, but through plague, through ritual, through staff and serpent. Egypt would fall, not to armies, but to allegiance. When a pharaoh commands the slaughter of infants, something deeper than fear is at play. The book of Exodus records it plainly. "Every son that is born you shall cast into the Nile, but every daughter you shall keep alive." History remembers this as cruelty. Scripture preserves it as prophecy. But beneath both interpretations lies a sharper logic. This was not just a political order, it was a precision strike, a divine counter-operation. And its target was not a people, but a bloodline. The Hebrews had grown, numerically, structurally, and spiritually, not assimilated into Egyptian life, but set apart. They clung to a name, Yahweh, a deity not listed in Egypt's temple inscriptions, a god without authorized shrine or statue. Yet he was remembered, and, more disturbingly, anticipated. In the celestial calculations of Egypt's priesthood, this presence loomed as a disruption in the divine order, one not merely ideological, but genetic. From the Anunnaki perspective, bloodlines were strategic vessels. Hybridization was not taboo, it was method. In the Sumerian tradition, Enki was the architect of such unions, blending divine and human DNA to produce lineages capable of governance, ritual alignment, and technological interfacing. This process was not random. It was administered, preserved, and protected. The Hebrews, descendants of Abraham, himself initiated under the Elohim in the land of Sumer, where an Anunnaki, Nanar, the moon god, was worshipped, may have represented one such lineage. Their growing numbers meant something more than fertility. It meant the reactivation of a dormant protocol. Here, we must consider the role of rival deities. If Enki engineered the bloodline through which Yahweh's influence flowed, then his rivals, particularly Enlil and his proxies, may have seen this resurgence as an existential threat. Enlil, known in Sumerian tablets as the supreme commander of Earth operations, favored obedience, order, and suppression of human independence. He had once ordered humanity's destruction in the flood. The reappearance of a divine strain not under his command could warrant immediate neutralization. The Egyptian priesthood, long theorized to operate under the tutelage of beings aligned with Enlil's order, would have executed such a decree with precision. And then there is the question of Marduk, son of Enki, warrior god of Babylon, and relentless in his ambitions. Marduk's name does not appear in the Exodus text, yet his fingerprints may lie beneath. Known for aggressively expanding his influence into rival territories, Marduk could have viewed Egypt as either a former stronghold or a target of reclamation. Marduk's incursions triggered celestial alignments and terrestrial wars. The infanticide may thus reflect a deeper strategy, not merely to quell population, but to prevent Yahweh from staging a counterinsurgence through a hybrid agent. The sparing of females further cements the hypothesis. Genetic activation and transmission were often male-line affairs. Females could be used to breed, to absorb, even to redirect alliances. But the male child carried the code, the memory, and the claim. Eliminate him, and the god loses his vessel. When this lens is applied to the Exodus narrative, the slaughter of male infants looks less like myth and more like a tightly managed biostrike. Eliminate the activation points, stall the emergence of a competing power. And still, resistance surged. 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, refused to participate. Their defiance was not just moral, it was tactical. Their deception, claiming Hebrew women gave birth too quickly, bought time, protected carriers, shielded the code. These women acted without vision or miracle. Yet their choice rippled through time, enabling the survival of one who would break Egypt's system from within. Moses, a male child born into extermination, hidden not in anonymity but in flow, placed in the Nile, the blood artery of Egypt, not drowned but delivered, plucked by the daughter of the regime meant to kill him, raised within the palace, educated in the protocols of the enemy. This is no accident. It is redirection, a divine retrieval. The river becomes the carrier of a counter-program. Moses, preserved not by fate but by covert design, enters the bloodstream of the opposing system. And Yahweh waits, not in absence but in preparation. The purge of the sons was meant to be surgical, but it failed. The code survived, the vessel matured, and the silence that followed would not last. The Elohim of the Hebrews was watching. And soon his voice would return, not as whisper, but as command, not from heaven, from flame. A newborn drifts along the Nile, wrapped in bitumen and reeds, carried not by accident but by design. Egypt calls it mercy, Scripture frames it as fate, but the deeper pattern suggests something else. a transfer protocol, a covert placement into the heart of enemy infrastructure. Moses is not just saved, he is deployed. His story begins under genocide, born at a time when male Hebrew infants were marked for elimination. Yet this infant avoids death not by concealment but through delivery into Pharaoh's domain, the very regime enforcing his extinction. The Nile, long revered as divine artery, becomes a clandestine transport network. The child's vessel, sealed with bitumen, mirrors older Sumerian birth rituals, such as that of Sargon of Akkad, another infant cast upon waters, another child who rose to power. Such parallels are too specific to dismiss as coincidence. These are repeated vectors of divine strategy. Anunnaki logic favors infiltration over isolation. From the Anunnaki vantage, Moses' positioning is archetypal. The deployment of genetically or spiritually significant offspring into rival domains is a known pattern. Ancient narratives describe the sons of Elohim, or the sons of the gods being planted among men, strategically raised inside enemy systems. Moses is a Hebrew by blood, but groomed by Egypt's most elite priestly and royal institutions. He is granted access to the secrets of a rival divine order. Languages, hieroglyphs, celestial calendars, rituals, weaponry. This is not merely noble education, it is technological initiation. Pharaoh's household, particularly in this period of aggressive consolidation after Hyksos expulsion, was not simply political. It was an esoteric control node. Egyptian priesthoods functioned like engineering corps, safeguarding knowledge inherited or extracted from their gods. Moses absorbed this while still connected to his mother, who acted as both caregiver and covert instructor. Yahweh's agent grew under dual tutelage, Egypt's sanctioned knowledge and Israel's forbidden memory. This duality was never meant to remain dormant. In Anunnaki operations, the hybrid or chosen vessel often undergoes a catalytic rupture, a moment that breaks the program and activates the deeper command. For Moses, it is the killing of an Egyptian overseer, not an accident, a threshold. He had crossed from observer to agent, from programmed to active. His flight to Midian is not a retreat, it is recalibration. Wilderness in this context is not absence but buffer. In the space beyond Egypt's surveillance grid, the encounter with new priestly lineage, Jethro, a Midianite high priest, exposes Moses to another layer of encoded knowledge. Midianite traditions, close to Canaanite and even pre-Abrahamic rites, bear remnants of older Elohim alignments. Here, Moses is refined, not softened, trained further in survival, in ritual, and above all, in waiting. This echoes how Anunnaki-linked agents are often reconditioned before re-entry. Gilgamesh journeys beyond the known lands. Adapa, Enki's created human, is sent to the heavens. Enoch walks with the Elohim, or the Anunnaki, and vanishes. These are not vanishings, they are uploads, transfers, protocols activating before mission deployment. Thus, Moses' return to Egypt is not that of a fugitive come home. It is the reappearance of a sleeper agent, now aligned, awakened, and armed with both spiritual allegiance and technological understanding. He has navigated the highest echelons of Egyptian power, survived purging, and trained in extra-national priesthoods. What returns is not merely a man, it is a countermeasure. Moses will soon face gods, not in poetic abstraction, but as institutional powers with ancient roots and technological teeth. His very life is an anomaly within Egypt's order, a signal that a different Elohim is reasserting influence. It didn't begin with thunder or trumpet. It began with fire, contained, motionless, inexplicably alive. A bush that burned but was not consumed. The story as told is soaked in reverence, framed as spiritual awakening. But its mechanics betray something else. This was not a metaphor. This was contact. Moses had fled Egypt. He had evaded law, escaped empire, disappeared into the folds of obscurity. But the wilderness is never empty. It is the seam between worlds. The place where authority thins and borders bleed. And it was there, near Mount Horeb, called the Mountain of God even before the event, that something ancient reawakened. The bush blazes, yet is untouched. It is no ordinary flame. It radiates light but consumes nothing. In a technological lens, this is not symbolic fire. It aligns with forms of controlled energy, plasma fields, localized projection phenomena, high-frequency emission contained within a specific spatial node. This manifestation, perceived by ancient eyes as divine fire, may in fact be an interface, an active access point for contact. The site may have functioned as a previously constructed landing zone or signal relay, used for communication between terrestrial agents and higher operatives within the Anunnaki chain of command. The Hebrew verb used when Moses turns aside to investigate is ra'ah, to see, to observe intently. This is not an internal vision, it is a physical engagement. He approaches cautiously, and then the voice activates. It does not boom in abstraction. It names itself, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. This is not the introduction of a universal creator. It is identification, ancestral, operational, tribal. The entity is declaring its jurisdictional claim, not its cosmic authorship. This is an Elohim, one among others, re-establishing contact with its designated human node. The statement, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, translated traditionally as I am that I am, is not philosophical. Its Hebrew structure implies ongoing manifestation. I will be what I will be, or I become what I choose to become. This is not a definition of essence. It is a declaration of flexibility and controlled appearance. A statement of power, not presence. A response calculated to affirm authority while maintaining functional ambiguity. Moses is instructed to remove his sandals. In the standard reading, this is humility. In a technological reading, it is hazard mitigation. The removal of conductive materials before entering high-energy zones is not religious. It is safety protocol. Ancient temples, especially those where godly presence was invoked, were built with precise electromagnetic awareness. Contact zones required bodily grounding. The term holy ground may literally mean activated space, energetically alive terrain. Yahweh then states, I have come down. The verb yarad is spatial, directional, material. This is descent, not inspiration. This Elohim is not speaking from beyond, it is operating within. The language is precise. I have seen, I have heard, I have come down to deliver. Surveillance, assessment, intervention, these are phases of a covert operation, a campaign being launched. The tool of that campaign is Moses. When Moses resists the mission, the Elohim does not speak in riddles. It arms him with signs, transformative devices, a staff turning into a serpent, possibly a dynamic tool capable of kinetic manipulation. A hand turning leprous and healed, biological modulation. Water turning into blood, liquid phase alteration or optical deception. These are field demonstrations, calibrated to shock the target audience and enforce legitimacy. They are not metaphors. They are controlled phenomena designed to convey authority and catalyze obedience. The voice instructs with increasing urgency. This is not a god pleading. It is a commander activating an asset. Moses is not chosen for his virtue, but for his training, his dual identity, his genetic coding. His Egyptian education grants him strategic access. His Hebrew origin grants him tribal legitimacy. Together, he is a perfect node, engineered for subversion. Mount Horeb, then, is not just a sacred place. It is a staging ground, a reactivation site, an open channel for directives. It marks the first movement of Yahweh's campaign against a rival divine infrastructure. The Elohim of the Hebrews is no longer a whispered name. He is now an active force, speaking, planning, descending. The burning bush did not burn. It glowed with ancient energy. It stood not as metaphor, but as machinery, an emissary of presence. And through it, war was declared. Not with fanfare, not with legions, but with light, controlled, contained, and absolutely deliberate. When Moses returned to Egypt, he did not come with troops or treaties. He came with a rod, a voice, and a directive. Backed not by ideology, but by operational command. Egypt was not about to be challenged by rebellion. It was about to be destabilized by a series of coordinated strikes. Each plague, recorded in Scripture as miraculous horror, was in fact precise, each one aimed not simply at Pharaoh, but at the very infrastructure of divine power in Egypt. What unfolded was not natural disaster. It was a theological dismantling through tactical escalation. The first sign was the staff, a rod cast to the ground, transformed into a serpent. Egyptian priests responded with similar feats, serpent against serpent, symbol against symbol. But Moses' serpent devoured the others, a silent message sent in their own language. Your protocols have been read, and they are being overwritten. The staff was not a prop, it was a device, and the war had begun. The plagues began with water, Egypt's bloodstream. The Nile, source of life and commerce, turned to blood. The fish died. The river stank. Khnum, the potter god of Nile creation, and Hapi, its guardian spirit, were rendered helpless. Osiris, whose lifeblood flowed in the river according to myth, was mocked by the corruption of his own symbol. This was not symbolic pollution. It was targeted sabotage of one of the central biospheric systems. Frogs came next, not simply as infestation, but as divine mockery. Hecate, the frog-headed goddess of birth and regeneration, was evoked, but not as protector. Her symbol became pestilence, suggesting loss of control. These plagues were layered. They undermined faith while undermining ecology. To the Egyptian priests, this wasn't a natural event. It was the breach of a protected zone. Then came lice, formed from dust. In Egyptian cosmology, Geb, the god of the earth, was supposed to sustain stability. But now, even the very particles of earth turned hostile. This attack moved from water to animals to humans. Each vector was not chosen for chaos, but for precision. Flies followed, or possibly wild beasts, depending on translation. Either way, Egypt's structured boundaries dissolved. Sacred spaces were violated. Offerings were tainted. The divine order, called Ma'at, was breaking down under swarm and intrusion. Khepri, god of movement and rebirth, whose scarab form symbolized transition, was now surrounded by uncontrollable life forms he was supposed to guide. The death of livestock crippled economic power. Apis bulls and Hathor's cattle, icons of divinity and prosperity, were struck down. These weren't just beasts. They were ritualized embodiments. Their deaths were both economic and metaphysical collapse. Agricultural systems, priestly rituals, food distribution, all buckled under invisible force. Then, the human body was struck. Boils and sores disfigured priest and citizen alike. Even Pharaoh's sorcerers could not stand before Moses. Sekhmet, warrior goddess and healer, offered no restoration. Medical temples were powerless. If earlier plagues attacked infrastructure, this one attacked embodiment. The divine image, the perfected Egyptian form, broke down. Hail and fire came next. Nut, the sky goddess, and Shu, lord of air, failed to moderate the elements. Crops were shredded, trees split, roofs collapsed. This was not weather, it was atmospheric manipulation, a breach in planetary balance. Energetic discharge designed to look like weather, but operating outside of expected patterns. Locusts finished what hail did not. Neper, god of grain, and Min, guardian of fertility, were humiliated. Egypt's vaults, symbols of divine favor, emptied in hours. This wasn't simply famine, it was deconstruction of abundance. Then, darkness. Not a cloudy sky, not symbolic depression, a palpable, disorienting darkness that lasted 3 days. Thoth, master of cosmic order, and Ra, the sun god himself, were eclipsed. The very axis of Egyptian faith, the cyclical rebirth of light, failed. Without sun, time itself lost rhythm. Temple alignments, priestly observances, calendrical rituals, all went silent. The operational command chain of Egypt's gods collapsed. The final strike, death of the firstborn, was surgical. It bypassed walls, ignored guards, penetrated bloodlines. This was genetic targeting, biological culling based on status, age, and lineage. A plague that moved like a scanning algorithm, selecting only the eldest males, not just sons, but heirs. Pharaoh's own child was not spared. There was no priestly protection, no amulet or chant or gate stood in the way. Only homes marked by lamb's blood survived, an act not of superstition, but of selective shielding. Identification codes, biomarkers, signaling protection not from disease, but from execution. Every plague mirrored an Egyptian god. Every strike wasn't just destruction, it was disempowerment. This was not Moses versus Pharaoh. This was a god, Yahweh, launching a full-spectrum counter-divine operation. One Elohim reasserting territorial dominance against the entire framework of another divine system. Egypt fell. Not through military invasion, but through precision, plague by plague, vector by vector, infrastructure to embodiment, heaven to ground. And in the end, Pharaoh, who had declared himself God, was left broken, not dead, but nullified. A king who had failed his pantheon. And then came the Exodus, with pillars of cloud and fire, directed atmospheric displays, guiding the Hebrews. Pharaoh pursued, but the sea opened, not with mysticism, but with force. Possibly tectonic, perhaps electromagnetic, maybe atmospheric, but real. The people passed, the army drowned, not because they were unworthy, but because they were unshielded. Yahweh's campaign was not evangelism, it was eradication, not a call to believe, but a demand to acknowledge. Egypt's gods had stood as rulers. Now they stood silent. The war had been fought, not in myths, but in systems. Not for souls, but for control. And ahead, in the wilderness, new protocols waited, new laws, new confrontations. Because the war was not over. It had simply changed terrain. Egypt lay behind them, broken and flooded, its gods dethroned and its army lost to the sea. But the real war had only just begun. The battlefield shifted, not to a foreign kingdom, but to the hearts of the rescued. And in the vast, exposed wilderness, the true test of loyalty, obedience, and control unfolded, not only for a people, but for their God. The wilderness was never meant to be a resting place. It was a crucible, a controlled environment for observation, refinement, and culling, a proving ground where protocols would be tested and command structures clarified. Yahweh did not disappear into abstraction. He became more visible, more direct, more insistent. His presence was not occasional, it was constant. Pillars of fire by night, cloud by day, signals in the sky, movements dictated by celestial markers. This was not worship, this was command-response training. And yet, the human subjects faltered. Food became the first pressure point. They hungered. In response, a substance appeared. Manna, described as white flakes, dew-like, appearing each morning with the consistency of frost. It spoiled if hoarded, vanished if ignored, and returned on schedule. The description is precise, timed, and systematic. This was not miracle, it was controlled delivery. Rationed sustenance, an intelligent food production system deployed under tight regulation. When meat was requested, quail arrived, in mass, driven by wind falling from the sky in numbers that fed an entire nation. The logistics of this are staggering, yet described plainly. Biological material delivered on command. Was this divine provision or biofield manipulation? Atmospheric routing of migratory patterns by unknown technology? Whatever it was, it happened not once, but repeatedly, and each time it came with instruction. Obey the protocols and the system functions, break them, and punishment follows. At Horeb, thirst drove another intervention. Moses struck a rock and water emerged. But the Hebrew wording suggests force. He strikes with purpose, not chance. And the result is not trickle, but flow. Some read this as faith, others as miracle, but the language reads like activation. Was this an ancient reservoir access point, a geological release node, or a divining interface that tapped underground channels? Whatever the mechanism, it was repeatable, and it was precise. But the people complained, murmured, questioned leadership. They feared the wilderness more than they remembered the chains. Each complaint, each whisper of rebellion was recorded. In military terms, this was a breakdown in morale. In divine terms, it was a protocol breach. Spies were sent into Canaan, 12 men, elite, instructed to observe and report. What came back was not data, it was fear. 10 spoke of giants, of fortified cities, of certain defeat. Only 2, Joshua and Caleb, remained aligned with the mission. The others were punished, silenced. Their fear spread like a virus, contaminating the nation. And so Yahweh responded with time. 40 years of delay, a generational purge. The infected code would not be allowed to execute. Only the loyal would advance. Moses, the chosen vessel, felt the weight. His authority, once absolute, cracked under the strain. He struck the rock again, once, then twice. Yahweh had told him to speak, not strike. The violation was minor in action, but catastrophic in implication. It was a breach of role. Moses, the interface between human and divine, had acted on instinct, not command. And for that, he too was denied entry into the promised land. Not because of disobedience alone, but because of system failure. The hierarchy faltered, and through it all, Yahweh remained visible, blazing in tabernacle fire, descending in clouds, issuing laws, counting heads, directing movement. His anger was not abstract, it was explosive. His joy, rare. His instructions, exact. His personality, strikingly human. He hungered for loyalty. He punished like a betrayed ruler. He changed his mind, bargained, grieved. This was not the cold distance of a universal deity. This was the volatile temperament of a commander deeply invested in his creation, furious at their doubt, wounded by their resistance. What unfolded in the wilderness was not only a journey of survival, it was a controlled experiment in fidelity, a test of command under stress. And as failures mounted, the landscape became a filter, stripping away the weak, the fearful, the rebellious. Yahweh did not abandon his people. He trained them through pressure, purged them through time, and shaped them for a new deployment. Beneath the surface of mana and murmuring lay a deeper architecture, a system of testing that mirrored advanced operational programs. From dietary laws to the architecture of the tabernacle, a mobile command center with specified zones, materials, and rituals, everything suggests an interface between human obedience and external technology. The Ark of the Covenant itself, carried with explicit warnings and surrounded by electric phenomena, functioned less as relic and more as power core. Touch it wrongly and die. Stand near it in battle and win. The wilderness was never empty. It was filled with fire, food from the sky, and commands echoing in wind. It was the zone between bondage and conquest, where gods made their demands known, not through mystery, but through method. And those who survived would carry not just memories, but programming, rituals, laws, and patterns etched into generations. But even as they marched toward the promised land, the question remained: were they chosen because they were strong, or because they could be controlled? The mountain rose like a boundary stone at the edge of the known world. Sinai, called the mountain of the Elohim, was not a symbol. It was a site, a rendezvous point. And when the moment came, it did not unfold in soft whispers or ethereal peace. It came with fire, with smoke, with the roar of an unknown engine in the sky. What occurred there has been remembered as the cornerstone of divine covenant. But beneath the sacred language lies a very different architecture, a treaty, a transfer of law, a challenge to other gods. Moses ascended alone. The people were forbidden to approach. Boundaries were marked, penalties issued. Any breach of the perimeter was fatal. What kind of divine presence requires exclusion zones? What kind of revelation begins with shielding protocols? The texts describe the mountain trembling, the sky rumbling, a thick cloud descending, and the sound of a shofar growing louder, not diminishing. This is not metaphor. This is pressure, vibration, acoustic force. Yahweh descended not invisibly, but within observable physical parameters. The mountain became a landing zone, and then Moses vanished into the cloud. What happened next is cloaked in reverence, but if read plainly, it resembles abduction, or initiation, or both. Moses is called upward. He disappears for 40 days, no food, no water. When he returns, his face glows. He must cover it. The people cannot bear the radiance. Something happened in that time, something that altered him, neurologically, physiologically, perhaps genetically. And he did not return with vague visions. He returned with code. The tablets of stone, etched with divine writing, were not merely moral precepts. They were protocols, laws of alignment, boundaries of conduct meant to structure a people under divine administration. The structure is unmistakably covenantal: stipulations, consequences, rituals. It reads like a suzerain vassal contract, where Yahweh is the dominant lord and Israel the loyal subject. The commandments begin not with ethics, but with jurisdiction. I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of Egypt. Identity, action, claim, and then, you shall have no other Elohim before me. Not, there are no others, but none before me. This is not monotheism, it is monopoly. It is territorial sovereignty. The Hebrew term Elohim is plural akin to the Anunnaki. It acknowledges others. The clause is not denial of rivals, it is restriction of allegiance. But below the mountain, the people grew restless. The cloud persisted. Moses did not return, and old instincts stirred. They demanded a God they could see. And so Aaron, under pressure, crafted the golden calf. This was not random idolatry. The calf was not a new god. It was a signal, a symbol tied to the ancient deities of the Nile, Apis in Egypt, Baal in Canaan. The people had known these beings. They had witnessed their rites. They had perhaps worshipped them in shadows. The golden calf was a reactivation attempt, a broadcast, an unauthorized reconnection to a rival Elohim. And it worked. Something responded, not visibly, but spiritually. Celebration erupted. The people declared the calf to be the Elohim who brought us out of Egypt. This was defection, a break in divine contract, and Yahweh's reaction was immediate. He threatened to wipe them out entirely. Moses intervened. He argued, bargained, diverted the judgment. But when he descended and saw the scene, the fracture was irreversible. The tablets, etched by divine hand, were shattered. The treaty, momentarily, nullified. What followed was not spiritual correction, it was purge. Moses stood at the gate and called for loyalty. The tribe of Levi responded. They drew swords, not against enemies, but brothers. 3,000 fell, not by divine hand, but by tribal enforcement. This was not wrath, it was consolidation. The faithless were eliminated, the hierarchy reasserted, and Levi, for its loyalty, was given priesthood, administrative power under Yahweh's command structure. The mountain encounter at Sinai then was not only spiritual elevation, it was the staging ground for jurisdictional warfare. The laws delivered were not platitudes, they were protocols, and the response to their breach was not patience, it was violence. Yahweh did not punish the calf for being gold. He punished it for what it meant, a rival frequency, a breach in control, a threat to his sovereignty over a people he had claimed with fire and blood. Sinai stands not only as a place of revelation, it is the memory of a transaction, sealed in smoke, written in stone, and defended by sword. A divine treaty forged in the wilderness, and in its shadow, the people were given not just a god, but a ruler, not just laws, but command chains. And from that moment forward, disobedience would not be doubt, it would be treason. The land stretched before him, vast and fertile, yet sealed. From the heights of Mount Nebo, Moses gazed across the Jordan Valley, not as a conqueror, but as a witness. He would see the promised land, but never enter it. This was not mere tragedy, but transition. A moment encoded with significance, marking the end of one operational phase of divine intervention and the prelude to another. The reason, we are told, was Meribah. There, in the desert of Zin, Moses struck a rock. Yahweh had instructed him to speak to it, to operate via command protocol, energy through word, not brute action. But Moses, whether through fatigue or frustration, reverted to an older method and struck. Water came, the people drank, but Yahweh was displeased. The act disrupted the intended sequence, suggesting that Moses had deviated from strict adherence to divine operational parameters. It was less about disobedience and more about systemic integrity. For this deviation, Moses was denied entry, not as punishment, but as a boundary marker. His mission, as prototype handler and intermediary, was concluded. His final moments were solitary. No crowd, no farewell, only a view, a disappearance, and a grave never found. The text says Yahweh buried him, and no man knows his grave. This secrecy was likely strategic. In ancient traditions, especially those tied to the Anunnaki, bodies, especially of hybrid figures or divine intermediaries, were not discarded but secured. If Moses carried Anunnaki genetic encoding, or if his prolonged exposure to Yahweh's presence altered him, then his body represented high-value biological material. Concealing it would prevent both veneration and unauthorized access. Similar practices are seen in Mesopotamian royal burial customs, where demigods and elite figures were interred in secret or highly protected tombs. Throughout his mission, Moses spoke with Yahweh face to face as a man speaks with his friend. This is not metaphorical. The Hebrew, panim el panim, signifies physical proximity, direct interaction. Yahweh's engagements with Moses included visual appearances, audible voice, and precise instruction. This was not spiritual communion. It was direct command relay between entities, one terrestrial, one aerial, or possibly non-human. In this context, the Promised Land was never just a homeland. It was a strategic acquisition, a resource-rich zone, topographically elevated and ideal for long-term operations. It would serve as a divine base of operations, a forward node in the contested grid of divine territories. Just as Egypt had hosted rival factions of the Anunnaki, possibly Marduk or Ningishzidda in different periods, Canaan would now fall under Yahweh's dominion. Here, it is important to remember that Yahweh, from an Anunnaki perspective, likely belonged to one faction in a larger conflict among these entities. While Enlil had long held dominion over command protocols and Earth-based jurisdictions, Enki, Marduk, and others often clashed for influence. Yahweh's actions, including the exclusion of Moses and the imminent militarization under Joshua, reflect not abstract theology, but strategic moves in a planetary contest. Marduk, known for his ambition and complex relationship with both Enki and Enlil, may have been influencing Egypt during this era, operating through local theocratic systems. The timing of Moses' death, therefore, coincides with a shift in territorial agendas, from nomadic mobility to land seizure. Moses' exit handed the baton to Joshua, a military operator, not a mystic. What followed was not mere settlement, but divine conquest, what in military terms could be described as invasion and occupation of a rival's zone of influence. This phase, fully narrated in the book of Joshua, will be examined in future content. There, we see Yahweh orchestrating battles, collapsing city walls, and deploying advanced technologies, possibly including the Ark of the Covenant, as strategic weapons. The Ark, carried into battle, emitted forces that shattered defenses, perhaps functioning as a mobile energy device or a communications interface. In these campaigns, Yahweh didn't merely defend his people. He launched an offensive against rival Elohim, who still held claim to the region. Moses' legacy, therefore, was foundational but transitional. He received laws, established protocols, built the mobile command center, the tabernacle, and set the parameters for divine-human interaction. His role was engineering and instruction. Joshua's role would be enforcement. But Moses left more than rules. He left a pattern, a living protocol. His legacy encoded a system where divine-human interaction was precise, where obedience meant survival, and deviation led to loss of access. Yahweh wept for him, they say, not from distant divinity, but from engaged proximity. This was a God who felt, grieved, enforced, and deployed. Behind the sacred veil lies a more ancient reading, of a God who was one among others, of wars among the skies and ground, of advanced technologies mistaken for miracles, and of a genetic legacy hidden beneath myth. The question remains, if Moses was removed because his phase was complete, What kind of agent will lead the next? And in the deeper layers of the story, we must ask, if the gods once fought for territories, what territories are they preparing to reclaim now? The Promised Land was just the beginning. The conquest, as we shall explore in the book of Joshua, will unveil the broader war, one not merely among men, but among gods.